Hi guys, I'm going to make you a little book report of this nice book, Radical Inclusion. Let's see, I can't quite get it in the, I have my camera on top of a wine glass, so this is good enough for this size book. These guys, so Martin Dempsey was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which means he was a general in the, I think, Army, and rose up through the ranks, 4-star general, and then ended up as Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Ari Ruffman is a peacenik vegan professor at UC Berkeley, so these guys teamed up at some point. And radical inclusion is not so much about inclusion as you and I might think about it as leadership in the 21st century. And so this is them talking about it. Now, in terms of reading it, there's two things. Most of it's about Dempsey, occasionally stuff about Ori. They call him Dempsey, last name, they call him Ori, first name, Ha. I'm looking at Heart of Agile as an organization in this particular case, and through the lens of, we're trying to create a distributed organization. And so I read this as, what are the properties of an organization? And then inside, if we have a networked organization as we do, and then I'm a distinguished element in that mesh network, so to speak. And so I have extra assignments in the leadership category. But almost everything you say about a leader should apply to every single person, in the guest leadership sense. So that's my way of looking at it. That's the book. It was, cut off that many pages. And then I cut it down to that many pages, which I'm going to go through with you. There were 6 points. Actually, the writing was kind of scattered, so it was kind of hard to pull things out. But the main thing is there's 6 leadership principles, he calls them. Meaning, that everybody has a sense of meaning, but the organization has a sense of meaning, and the shortest form of that is to say our one thing. What is our one thing? The essential thing we have to do. We have to. What is our one thing that you have to know? What's the one thing? Belonging, as you could imagine, and he goes after amplifying memories of shared success. And I was, of course, looking at how do you increase people's sense of belonging, etc. We had little side notes. Every now and then he would introduce a different topic slowly, and here the key one for me was this idea of surprise neurons. So when you sit down on a chair and the chair is a little bit lower than you expect, within that little distance of falling between where you expected the chair to be and where your butt finally touches the chair, your brain's already raised an alarm. So your body knows what it expects going to happen in the next microseconds, milliseconds, and is way on the alert that something isn't matching reality. The point being, and he brings this into belonging, but it comes back into the third one, peripheral vision. This idea that in an organization, you have to have, you need everybody to belong, to have a feeling of belonging, because everybody, there's this big antenna. You need people to act as surprise neurons, and his comment is there are no organizations that really do well with surprise neurons. And by the way, I read Andy Grove's book, Only the Paranoid Survive, and he also talks about surprise neurons and what to do with them. So that was really, really interesting to see a link. A link between this and Andy Grove's book, about Intel. Third one, he calls it something else, but I picked out of there this idea of peripheral vision. Everybody in the organization is an antenna picking up signals, and you have the dominant signals that come from the extroverts and the power players. But the trick is to listen to weak signals, and so that links in with surprise neurons, etc., and belonging. Right. So you have to make personal safety, belonging. Do they care, etc. Bias for action is pretty obvious, but he has a couple of little notes I'll look at there. So don't get stuck. Move. And then co-create, very cool, suits us. And he uses ways as an example of co-creation, and then expand the circle of power. He calls it something else, but we're talking about distributed power. But he calls it expand the circle of power, somewhere in there. And then here he has then specifically for actions for leaders is your job is to listen, amplify, and include. And then of course then we look at a community organization, which we are, and then we want the most number of people, anybody who has some spare energy for the moment, it's going to, listen hard and then amplify things they think are interesting and add to the inclusion. So those are actions for everybody. Then little side notes he throws in. He brings in the notion of a battle of narratives. That's what we're in a battle of narratives, and the key is to tell emotionally, and if there's competing narratives, he says you just overtell and you drown out the things. Little note about leaders. He said leaders define the organization's white lines. I kind of like that one. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And then he throws in, randomly at some point, this concept of, he says, broaden the context. He talks about the Impossible Burger and vegan burgers and stuff, because it was Ori's specialty. And Impossible Burger makes it because they don't try to convince vegans that they have a better vegan burger. They try to convince ordinary people not to worry about what's inside the meat patty, because the whole bun concept is much better. So Impossible Burger is succeeding because it's broadened the context and whatever his upmarket, times 100. And then there was down at the bottom a little note. He said, a leader's work is to magnify something. One of the things that's problematic is if there are several places he says the most essential thing about leadership is, and if you say that more than once with a different thing, then obviously it wasn't right the first time. Right? So then I'm already 6 minutes into this. Let's see. So here's how I then digested the book. Meaning are one thing. Your job is to amplify belonging, amplify shared memories of success, and then highlight everybody's impact. Peripheral vision, use weak signals. Has a story about gloves in the hospital, which I can recount later. Bias for action. The action gives you three things: learning, it gives you energy, and it gives you your end effect, of course, that you want, incremental deployment. And it links in with the OODA loop, so I have a note about that. Co-create, he calls it harvesting the knowledge and references the ways, so it's very cool, and that's when he brings in broaden the context. And then here's his listen, amplify, include. Talks about community leader, battle of narratives. Leaders define the white lines, develop content that mirrors the users, find influencers. Okay. Now, what was interesting for me, trying to keep simplifying it, is this little picture right here. Screen snapshot of that would probably be good, because I think that we could evaluate ourselves on these 6 dimensions, and I put them in the 3 2x2s to make it interesting. Like, we could literally measure ourselves. How are we doing that people feel that they know their meaning, or our meaning, or they sense of have a meaning, or we have a meaning, right? And how are they on the level of belonging, right? They feel a sense of belonging or not. And I think actually I wouldn't put this like this, it would be on the negative scale, -5 + 5. So meaning and belonging is 1. And this one here, the surprise neurons, can we hear weak signals? That would be a really interesting question to measure ourselves on. And then bias for action, which I think we're pretty weak on right now. And the other one is distribution of power. Do we have expanded circles of power, or how's the power distributed, and how are we doing on co-creation? So that's actually a pretty interesting way to measure an organization, I think. So I'm going to hang on to that. So that was, in a sense, that was my master takeaway. And then everybody, what we're trying to do, anybody who has some spare energy, listen, amplify, and include. So that was that. Now, to go through the book itself, so you can see how I vivisect the books here. So let's see. I'm going to occasionally pick out some pages. Here's this thing where he talks about a battle of narratives. That was pretty cool. Here's the thing where he's talking about the properties of narratives. I put them both in view so you can read them both. Facts I don't so much care about, but narratives are interesting or boring, emotional, spread, easily mutate. They depend on retelling and they're countered by drowning out. So that's pretty cool there. And then he talks about Dove and micro-influencers and letting people co-create. You guys have probably read this stuff by now. I should do that. Then this one, I didn't do the 3 central points of this book. First, not including comes at an economic cost. Second, the way to thrive in an age of digital echo is to bring a cause to a pre-existing community. Identify existing communities with whom the cause will likely resonate. And I circled that, but he didn't do anything with those guys, so I'm going to drop them. He talks about starfish versus spiders. Starfish is distributed, so he's introducing the concept of a network. Let's see here. Are you enabling people to participate in furthering your goals? Yeah. Good, fine, cause, effect, something. Community leader says we are a community. Anybody can be an influencer. Good, got it. This is the surprise neurons. We're talking about a tenth of a second after the error was committed. Here we have it. Introduces surprise neurons. People as neurons, that's my specialty. Talks about a janitor who finds something funny with the hospital gloves that he's picking up in the garbage cans, and that turns out to be critical insight. So here he has this idea of surprise neurons, and then he says, virtually no company has in place a dragnet similar to that of the human brain to pick up surprises at various levels. So that's a measurement for an organization. Surprise neurons, a card game. This is kind of cute. So now he's in belonging. He actually hasn't started on the 6 things yet, but he does talk about belonging, and this is an important list right here. Feeling that your efforts on behalf of the group are meaningful. Being able to imagine how your contribution will have a meaningful impact. Receiving rapid feedback about the impact you've had. Having positive memories associated with belonging. Feeling invited to belong as opposed to ordered. Engaging with the context whereby you're a part of the overall group narrative. That's a good one. I should have had my pen here to underline that one again. And he talks about some biology. Stuff doesn't matter. Yeah, right. Okay, so then he starts down the 6. And my iPhone storage is almost full, so I may run out of this. I may have to do this as a second. We're going to find out what happens with this iPhone when it runs out. Okay, I'm back. I have more video storage. So these are the 6. Belonging isn't, so I have those, they have a chapter name, a leadership principle. They don't always get the name right, so I did it. But anyway, number 1, about belonging. It says, give the memories that they belonged, aid in a sense of belonging, highlight successes with respect to belonging and the goal, highlight belonging of everyone. So that says, just keep saying, give them memories. Here it says, the most important responsibility of leaders is to make their people feel like they belong. I don't know, because it keeps saying the most important thing is lots of things. And what of? Okay, so I like this little section right here. Memories of successes. Every team member should have memories of what success looks like, how the team accomplished the goal, how the individual contributed to the goal, how accomplishing the goal served the highest purpose of the organization, what it felt like to be successful as an individual, what it felt like to be successful as a team, what it felt like to contribute to the success of the organization. That's pretty cool. Failures, that was interesting. Everyone should also have memories of what failure looks like, what the team did wrong, what it could have done better, etc. Being cared for, at the core of belonging are a sense of purpose and a sense of safety. What right looks like. Opportunities to learn how to decide what is the right thing to do and carry out his action, even when doing so is the more difficult route. What wrong looks like. Presents his or her team with situations where it will be easy to do the wrong thing. Coping with stress and other feelings associated with realizing the wrong things will be done. Experience and tools to cope with future losses and failures, right? So that was number 1. Number 2, the meaning thing, and here it was, is what is the one thing for your group to do better than anyone? The most important thing, essentially. So, for example, in the Army, he was in a situation where they decided with, N,000 people, their one thing, the one thing for them was to provide information to someone. And then for the whole military later, when he was in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said, we're specialists at coordination. What we do better than anyone else is coordination. We do provide an information hub, transportation, logistics, and training, which is interesting, those 4 for the Army. It's kind of nice, huh? One of the leaders' responsibilities is to make sense of things for their followers. I'm wondering about that because we're in a very intellectual organization with smart people, so I'm not sure it's my job to make sense of things quite the contrary. If we believe the distributed brain concept, weak signals and, you know, surprise neurons, it's quite almost the opposite. It's everybody's job to feed in and help, like, change my mind. So I'm not sure. Yeah. That's what I have to say about that. More about one thing. Here's the one thing, 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 the one thing. And here's my notes about the whole book that I was taking along the way. Number 3, he calls it, think about what you're not thinking about, learn to imagine. But this is really where he was talking about what I wrote it down as peripheral vision, developing, seeing stuff out of the corner of your eye. Here's where listening to weak signals becomes super important, and then building alternate scenarios. That's all there was inside of that, so I'll say that again. It's this idea of building alternative scenarios. To do that, you have to have good peripheral vision, and you have to make use of weak signals. How's that? Prevent decision analysis, bias for action, obviously, but he says 3 things. ACT gives you 3 things to learn. One second here. Sorry for the interruption. The thing that was interesting is, so act to learn. You learn when you act, you learn, right? That's the OODA loop. This action gives you information for making your next decision, right? That's what goes that way. And for energy, as you act, you get energy, and you act in order to deliver value to have some effect. So that's the bias for action factor. Number 5, he calls collaboration, collaborate at every level of the organization, co-create context, and he brings the example of harvest the knowledge. He brings the example of ways up several times as a fine example of co-creation at every level. So co-create, harvest the knowledge. But here he throws in a new idea. And search for broader context. So he talks the story of impossible foods, and basically you widen your market. I call it a market by a factor of 100 or 1,000. So you don't look for vegans. So for us, it's don't look for agilists. Look for people trying to get things done. Including that. And the final one, 6. Expand the circle of power. He says relinquish control, but basically it's about expanding the circle of power, distributed power, but I like that, expand the circle of power. And here he says the overall goal of leadership is to increase effectiveness and build a history of successes within. You see, I don't know which one of these is true. Let me see. Real power is measured not in the degree of control, but the ability to find real, optimum, affordable, and enduring solutions to complex problems. Stuff. Then he talks about leadership instincts in his listen, amplify, include. Be a good listen. And this is kind of nice. Listen to learn. Right, that's obvious. Amplify to establish connections, encourage teamwork at every level. Amplify, the best leaders establish a drumbeat of emphasis on values with their organization. Everyone benefits when there's this is a nice sentence. Everyone benefits when there's a common vocabulary about what's expected of them. Nice little sentence. And passing, and that's the end of the book. There's my notes again. And this is my final note. As I said before, this thing here. Belonging, meaning, bias for action, and hearing weak signals, co-creation and distribution of power. And there were those other little notes here. Battle of objectives. Oopsies, come on. There you go. Battle of objectives. Retell it emotionally and drown out others. Broaden the context. Boom. That's it. See you guys. Oh, and there's the... I will now put the book back into its very tiny little cover there and say ciao.